I'm thrilled to have Jay Johnson here with me today for this episode. Jay, over the course of his career, has been a journalist, a teacher, a writer, and an editor. And I first learned about Jay when I read an article he wrote for God and Nature magazine titled Practical Problems for Literal Adam, which talks about things such as how did Adam learn how to speak. And Jay reached out to me after I published my own book, and he shared with me a paper that he was writing or was in the review process at the Canadian American Theological Review, titled Adam as Archetype, Reconciling a Historical Fall and Original Sin in the Context of Evolution. And I think this is a really important paper.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I as a Christian, I struggle with, I have a challenge in reconciling Genesis 2 and 3 and the fall with evolution. And I think this is a really important topic for the church, and more discussion needs to be had on it. And it's also, it's also a really well written paper. And especially I want to point out that the broad range of expertise that had to be brought to bear on the paper from expertise in different areas of science as well as theology is really wonderful. And it's also well written.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's a great paper. So, and I will endeavor to post a link to academia.edu where the paper can be found. I'm going to try and do that in the description portion of this video. So Jay, given your background, how did you come to start writing about early Genesis and evolution?
Yeah, it was a long journey. My career started in journalism. I was a magazine editor for about 10 years, and then I owned my own custom publishing business for about 5 years. And then I had a change of careers and became a teacher. Specifically, I had been teaching a Bible study in a prison, and I looked around one day and realized that there was nobody in my group of about 20 or 25 guys. There was nobody in my group under the age of 25. And despite the fact that most of the people incarcerated are young people. So I kind of said to myself then, if they won't come to me, I need to find a way to come to them. And not too long after that, through a series of odd circumstances, God kind of called me to change careers, and I became a teacher actually in juvenile detention, teaching English for about 10 years there. But I moved here to New Mexico, from Dallas, and taught special education here instead of English. But, I got burned out on that career. Teaching is a burnout career. And I, had a book in mind. I wanted to write, I had 2 books in mind. I was going to write about my experience, teaching in juvenile detention, sort of a memoir. But the other thing I wanted to do was related to the problem of younger people abandoning the faith. And as I started to research this and look into it, I ran across Dave Kinnaman's book called You Lost Me.
You Lost Me.
Yeah. And I noticed, picked up 2 things there. And one was a lot of the problems were related to, the culture war, and that's still ongoing. And the other thing that I noticed was, a lot of people, younger people especially, were leaving the church because of this anti-science mindset that they thought they encountered. And, especially in regards to evolution. So that was what took me to BioLogos, originally just to do some research. And after I'd been there for about a year or so, they asked me to be a moderator in their discussion forums. And I did that for almost a year. But while I was doing that, that's when, occurred to me, the idea, the nugget of the article occurred to me just kind of, and it was one of those things. I happened to be reading Wittgenstein, the philosopher, and he said something that just knocked me between the eyes, which is that in learning language, we're learning a form of life, and that ties it together with culture, and that started me on the journey. I started looking at language and its symbolism and the evolution of those things. And that led into research on the evolution of the brain, because all of those three things are tied together and kind of rolled up in one. So that was the genesis of the thing, I guess you'd say.
Right. So moving into this paper, you view Genesis 2 to 3 as metaphor. What are the signs that we should be open to expecting metaphor in Genesis 2 to 3 rather than literal history? Is metaphor an effective way to communicate truth in Scripture even?
Oh, certainly, yes. Like, for example, in Genesis 1, John Walton, he may not have been the first, but he's probably the most well-known person who described this metaphor of the creation as temple construction. And so metaphor is also used in science. They use like brain development is often compared to the childhood development of the brain, because it follows a similar process and similar steps. So in looking at Genesis 2, I think we should expect metaphor right off the bat, because especially as you get into the story and you're talking about magic trees and a talking snake, and that's you're clearly not in the world of literal history at that point,
right.
Despite the fact that some people want to point it out or look at it that way.
Right. And in your paper, the metaphor is the coming of age, right? So
Yes.
yeah. So in fact, you write the genius of Genesis 2 to 3 is that the fall of the first humans mirrors the coming of age, not just of humanity, but of every individual person. Could you flesh that out a little bit for us?
Sure. The metaphor that I'm talking about there is like a metaphor of maturity, because if you look at the story, by the end of Genesis 2, it makes a point of saying that the man and the woman were naked and not ashamed. And and then the next thing that happens is, well, I take that back. They've already been given a command, or Adam was given the command, not to eat from the fruit of the tree. And then as you get into the story, immediately in Genesis 3, the serpent appears and challenges the command. But what I described in the paper is there's a trajectory there, and the trajectory is the same one that it follows pretty much exactly the trajectory of children and their moral development, because it starts with rules, and young children, they look at rules as just inviolable and sacrosanct. It's like almost like they were given by God. And the process of maturity, as the child grows and their brain develops, and their language skills develop, and by the age of 5, a kid has acquired the grammar of their native language. By the age of 8, though, they start to acquire metaphorical thinking. And the end of this process of moral maturity in a child is when they start to question the rules. And is this rule proper? And even start to question the motives of the rule givers. Is this rule, given by somebody with other motives who wants me to prevent me from doing something? And so the dialogue that you see Eve have with the serpent is really, a universal type of dialogue where all of us go through. Is, once you reach maturity, is every time you're confronted with a moral choice, you weigh it against your own values, you weigh it against your own morality, and is this the right thing to do, or is this an exception to the rule? And as an example, not all rules that we inherit from our culture are right and proper. For example, if you had grown up in 1920s Alabama, your culture would have been saturated with racism. And, is every person's moral duty at some point is to question, is this a proper rule? Is this rule worth having, or is it right? Or did the people who came up with this rule have ulterior motives? And so that's the reason that Genesis is kind of a universal story, and I believe it is, endured for so long. Genesis 2 and 3, is because it's true to life, and the picture it draws of, the emotional, the moral maturity of all of us, and how we make decisions, and what happens when we reach that point where you look up one day and you say to yourself, gosh, I'm a sinner.
And is that what you mean by Adam being an archetype, that he stands in for all of us, or is it slightly different
Yes.
than that?
No, that's along those lines. And that's, again, John Walton and Richard Middleton and others have kind of reached that same conclusion. And I'm borrowing from them. I'm not an original, scholar of Hebrew. So I have to rely on their work and the experts' work. And
well, we all stand on the shoulders of others. So
luckily they're giants and I'm
Yeah.
not. But yeah, so an archetype is a literary symbol that stands in for some sort of universal experience in human nature. And so, Adam and Eve in this case, the man and the woman is more proper. Their experience, is a universal human experience, and everybody recognizes that. Everybody recognizes that, yes, the fall didn't just happen in history. The fall happened in my own life personally.
Yeah.
And that's, an archetype. An archetype is a pretty powerful symbol to be able to use, because it, like I said, it relates to everybody, and so the man in Genesis 2 and 3 stands in for the collective human race, the collective humanity, and also represents the individual.
Yeah, and in fact, the word for Adam in Genesis in that story means mankind, rather than a personal name. Is that accurate?
Well, yes and no. It's in Genesis 1, in 1:26 to 28. Adam is used by itself, meaning humanity,
Right.
or all of mankind. When you get to Genesis 2, the title is, Ha-Adam, which is the man. And it's not a personal name because, there aren't that many resemblances between Hebrew and English. But one of them is that you don't use you don't use the definite article "the" with the person's name. I wouldn't say the John,
Mhm.
or you wouldn't say the Jay did this or that.
Mhm.
So, throughout Genesis 2 and 3, and really up until Genesis 5, Adam is not used as a proper name. It's used as more of a title, the human, you could say.
Yeah. So let's just get into just a couple bits of the Adam and Eve story. So, what is the significance to Adam and Eve being naked and not ashamed? Does that sort of mean they were in the innocent child state of being?
That's what I take it as, because that's the universal connotation. Is what? Who else is naked and not ashamed in human society besides
Yeah.
a 2-year-old,
Yeah.
maybe?
Yeah.
Because by the time a kid is 4 or 5, they're even becoming embarrassed of being naked in public. So I think that's one clue. And then when you get to the tree of knowledge, tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's where the other clues come in, because there's really like 4 different interpretations of the tree. And one of them would be that the tree represents some kind of a sexual awakening, mainly pulling from Genesis, from the naked and unashamed verse in Genesis 2. But I think that fails on several levels. Just as a practical matter, if we're looking at this as a universal human experience, well, the universal human experience of a sexual awakening is kind of the opposite of being naked and ashamed, because it's you feel naked in front of strangers, but you feel ashamed to be naked in front of strangers, but with your spouse, I'd say you'd have a pretty odd sex life if you felt ashamed to be naked in front of your spouse.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's one clue. But I take it, the other ways to interpret the tree of knowledge are that it represents some sort of divine wisdom, as a merism from A to Z, that it's all knowledge. But I think the interpretation that makes the most sense is just to look at it as coming of age,
Right.
where a child eventually learns, becomes mature and recognizes that I'm guilty. I'm guilty as anyone else.
And they disobey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they disobey, as we all do. So, so at what age, switching gears a little bit, at what age do we, and you mentioned this before, maybe well, no, I don't think you did. You talked about metaphorical thought being at age 8, but at what age do we sort of cross over from immature child to guilty adult? When do we fall generally?
It depends on the child, but generally the way it works is the brain is developing at the same time the child is developing certain language and language skills and thinking skills, so that by the age of 5, I mentioned the kids have acquired their native grammar, but it's not until about the age of 8 that they start to understand metaphorical or symbolic thinking. And that's the part that's really necessary for mature morality, because it depends on abstraction. It depends on being able to take, say, a rule and create an abstract category out of it. An easy way to explain that is one of my students when I taught special ed was on the autism spectrum. And he was he was really not able to generalize a rule. Like, if he had a habit of cussing out kids, and so if he cussed out a girl in the classroom, and I told him, you can't do that. Well, in his mind, he would translate it as, well, I can't cuss out that girl,
Hmm.
but everybody else was still free game. See, because he couldn't take that specific example and make a general category out of it and say, this is a general rule that applies to everybody. So,
Hmm.
if you want to look at, exactly what age, a good comparison would be, when societies start to hold kids responsible um, for their actions. And so, for example, a 5-year-old who finds daddy's gun and shoots a sibling, um, you're not going to put that child in jail for the rest of their life,
Yeah.
because they lack certain things to be able to comprehend what it was they had done. And one of the things that is missing is an ability to anticipate the consequences of your actions.
Hmm.
And that part comes with brain development, specifically your prefrontal cortex, which is
Hmm.
the forebrain here. And that's, the center of decision making, but it also is the center of planning. And so, young children, they don't foresee long range consequences. And so, usually about the age of, I know this because of my experience in juvenile detention, but, in the state of Texas where I worked, they will start to hold a child accountable at the age of 10,
Hmm.
because in the law, you have to draw a line in the
Yes.
sand somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's where they draw the line in the sand. And on the flip side, probably, for a normal kid, probably the outside boundary of that age would be, around puberty,
Hmm.
around the age of 13 or so.
Sure.
That's when they have a spurt of growth in the prefrontal cortex, and they start to, acquire a lot of other thinking skills that they didn't have as children, and especially being able to recognize the consequences of one's actions and project it out into the future. Because even teenagers don't really have maturity like we do as adults, because the brain keeps developing until the age of 25.
Hmm.
So, a teenager, they don't weigh consequences like we do.
Hmm.
They look at the consequences like, well, this will be pleasurable today, and they don't think about, well, what happens tomorrow, or
Yeah.
a year from now, or 5 years from now.
Right. So let's switch over from individuals in the fall to humanity in the fall.
Sure.
So you mentioned that you're in your opinion the fall of humanity occurred between 75,000 and 65,000 years ago,
Yeah.
and that's when we progressed, I would suppose, from immature children to guilty adults. And let's take a look at that. Why not before 75,000 years ago? Why is that a boundary? What was
Mhm.
missing before 75,000 years ago that meant the fall wasn't possible yet?
Let's see. It's probably easiest to explain that by going back, more than 1 million years ago,
Hmm.
because in order to have moral maturity, just like in a child, there has to be a certain level of language sophistication, and and brain development, and all of those things were lacking, 1 million years ago. You know, Homo erectus, 2 million years ago, when that species appeared, um, lacked lacked a lot of the physical components even to produce speech. So, about 1 million years ago, though, there was a certain brain development and also, things like in the spinal cord, there has to be enough room in the spinal cord to carry the nerves that allow you to control your breath, which makes speech possible, because like in a four-legged animal, when they run, every time their front legs hit the ground, their thorax braces for that, just like kind of a weightlifter, hoisting a bar. They, they have to hold the breath and hold the thorax. But so, about 1 million years ago, Homo erectus had the brain capabilities to produce speech, but also finally acquired some of the physical capabilities. And the thing that's the clincher that points to that time frame is trade networks, which is trade between groups, trade between neighboring groups. And here's how it works. It's like prior to 1 million years ago, all the hominins had about the same home range radius as a chimpanzee or a gorilla, about a diameter of about 13 kilometers that they would travel. I mean, well, a radius. So then about 1 million years ago, all of a sudden, trade goods started appearing, like rocks or things like that, flints or whatever it might be, tools, stone tools made of rock that would not be within, would be 100 kilometers away. And so how did it get there? And the answer is that, they started trading with each other. So, if you're having trade, that implies some form of communication. And language theorists pretty much believe that, language began first with gestures, like it does with an infant. An infant's first communicative gesture is point to, and from there they develop words. So that's the first step in language evolution is gesture and then single words. And that's a communication system. And that persisted until about 100,000 years ago, really. But in the meantime, the brains of Heidelbergensis and then, Neanderthal and then Denisovan and then, eventually Homo sapiens, continued to expand and get bigger. But the thing there is it's not just a matter of a bigger brain. It's a matter of a bigger brain and one that's wired together in a new and different way that allows a different kind of thought pattern than had ever existed before. And that's the phenomenon of globularity. And it began about 300,000 years ago. Well, it didn't begin about 300,000 years ago, but here's what I was trying to say was about 300,000 years ago with the appearance of the first Homo sapien, found in Morocco.
Morocco, yeah.
Yeah. That human has a brain roughly the size of ours and the same size as Neanderthal, but its brain is different. Its skull is a different shape. It's elongated instead of round like ours, like a globe. And so then about 100,000 years ago, three things occurred all at once. And this is, converging evidence that helps to pinpoint this thing, which is, at about 100,000 years ago, is when the shape of human skulls started to change. and become more rounded.
Mm.
And primarily this is, it's partly because the prefrontal cortex expanded some, but it's also, in the back of your head there, where your cerebellum is, that changed dramatically, and the cerebellum grew, and the cerebellum creates is involved in a lot of networks in the brain that pretty much just wire the whole thing together.
Mm.
So that, previous species, and even previous, Homo sapiens, it's like they might have, their thoughts were trapped in different, you could call them modules, like when they were making a tool, they were making a tool. When they were, hunting for food, they were hunting for food. But they didn't make a lot of cross connections and create metaphorical thinking.
Mm.
So, they're, I can't remember the psychologist's name, right off the,
That's all
I
right.
could look it up, but basically, this wiring together is what allows for creativity.
Mm.
Because, just thinking of a woman or a fish, that doesn't require integration, but thinking of a mermaid does. So yeah, what happened about 100,000 years ago was, our brain started to change, and that process continued till, maybe as early as, or as late as 30,000 years ago. So that span of time is the key span of time.
So symbolic thought becomes important here,
Yeah.
and important in the timeline. Is it the case then that we need symbolic thought in order to have morality in a sense of right and wrong?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so
They're all tied together,
they're
and
all tied together.
so about, the language ability, the brain development, and the metaphorical thought and symbolism. And the other two developments that happened at 100,000 years ago were the deep floof and my brain went blank again, but the deep floof about 100,000 years ago in South Africa. Was graphic markings, and within 20,000 years, those graphic marks started to show up on ostrich eggs that people are carrying around as water jars, basically. And also, they began to find beads that, shells with a hole drilled through them that could be worn around the neck. But the beads started to be placed in graves, which indicates some sort of, early form of spirituality, of a sense of, hey, this will go with them into the afterlife, however they might have conceived that. The other thing that happens is all of a sudden trade networks expand from about 100 kilometers to 300 kilometers. Whereas, this had been stable for almost 1 million years. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, they triple in size, meaning people were trading with groups 300 kilometers away for whatever, natural resources they might need. So the combination of those three things points to 100,000 years ago is a really key moment. And let's see, what was your question a second ago about symbolism and how that works? Here's how that works. Is there are some earlier examples of possible symbolic elements before 100,000 years ago, like there's an eagle talon with a hole drilled through it that Neanderthal may have used as some sort of symbol. Whether someone wearing that around their neck means, look, I'm a chieftain, or it could just mean, this is our tribe, and we're the eagle tribe or whatever. But here's the difference between that and what happened starting 100,000 years ago is whenever you deal with the symbols one at a time, it's not true symbolism in the human sense, because we use a whole network of symbols. And I was thinking of an example the other day, and that would be like you could teach a 3-year-old understands what a stop sign is, and oh, red means stop, right? But they don't know how to drive.
Mm.
They're not even close to knowing how to drive, because driving involves a whole lot of other things and a whole lot of other symbols, and things like anticipating consequences, anticipating other people's reactions. How are they going to? So, it's a rough comparison. It's a rough metaphor, but I think you get what I'm saying there.
Absolutely.
It's,
So,
it's
yeah,
it
absolutely.
was a whole network. We started to see, the world in metaphorical terms and in symbolic terms, whereas previous humans had not.
Yeah. And we need to be able to communicate with each other and to view things symbolically in order to have a code of morality. Is that something else I picked up from your
Sure.
paper, if I'm reading it right? And is that so? It
Right.
seems like because the morality is sort of an understood code of conduct, that I know that you understand it, and I know that you understand that someone else understands it, and we all know that we all know that we all understand it.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's sort of it requires symbolic thinking. It requires language. It requires
Right.
just a whole host of things that we had gained as a species. We had gained this by
Right.
100 to 75,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So the fall could have happened at that point. But then there's another boundary, which is 65,000 years, which you think it didn't happen earlier than, or closer to today.
It didn't happen after
After
that. Yeah.
after that. And then that has to do with the fact that humanity had dispersed by then.
Yes.
Okay.
It's tying it into the Out of Africa event, which is for your viewers who don't know, the Homo sapiens started in Africa, and if you look at history, basically about 65,000 years ago or so, the Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa, and this wasn't the first migration out of Africa. Humans Homo sapiens, I should be more specific, but Homo sapiens had gone, made it as far as like Israel, by 100,000 years ago. And we were living, at that time, pretty much side by side Neanderthals in the Levant. And if you look at the artifacts from both species, they're virtually identical. The humans in Skull Cave and in other places in Israel where they found them, they lived exactly like Neanderthals. And it's not exactly known, or maybe it's just not known to me, but for some reason, the human excursion into Israel 100,000 years ago didn't work, and Neanderthal disappeared from that region too. And so, about 65,000 years ago, humans migrated out of Africa, and this time it was successful, and filled the globe. And the interesting thing is geneticists can track this by the fact that the farther away you get from Africa, the less I can't think of the right word right now. Originality, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. I forget the word too. They use diversity, maybe.
Yeah, that might be a better word for it, because so that's a pretty good indication that after 65,000 years ago, humans had started dispersing around the globe. And here's the thing that coming back to your original question is, why couldn't the fall, or why couldn't if these things happened after that. And well, the reason is because just about everything that you see, that is universal to humankind had to have come from, an original source.
Hmm.
Like, for example, if morality was something that humans developed, 30,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, then we should have found a society or a culture somewhere that just lacked morality
Hmm.
or that lacked language
Right.
and, or lacked musicality or any, and we don't. So, it's kind of a philosophical argument, but it's pretty powerful. And most of those things had to have originated in Africa at the source of at the source of our species. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a universal feature of human culture or human life.
Sure. Okay, so let's move forward and let me challenge you with some anticipated sort of criticisms that I can see.
Oh, you're going to beat me over the head now, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So, uh, well, there could be many, but I'll just pick a couple. So,
Sure.
many will say that God gave humans a soul in Genesis 2, and in light of evolution, then when did God then do this? And so, how would an evolutionary creationist respond to this type of question?
Yeah, there's a couple of different answers on that one. The one that would be probably most popular, most Christians do believe that human beings are made up of body and soul,
Mhm.
or body and spirit. And so for myself, as far as when that happened or when that could have happened, for myself, it's we're stepping off into pretty iffy territory here, and a lot of and it's speculation,
Right.
and like I said in my paper, this could be one of those things that is a secret that remains hidden in God. But making my best guess, I would go off the analogy of the man in Genesis 2 is given the breath of life in Genesis 2:7. And then, his first action is naming the animals, is a linguistic action. And that's not the main point of the story there. But, without a doubt, it's linguistic. So, I kind of equate that with the point where, we became human. And like I was talking before, I would put that as far back as 1,000,000 years ago.
Yeah.
With Homo erectus, and they didn't have the capabilities that we have. They didn't have the brain that we have. They certainly had language, but they and so if you want to look at a soul or spirit, I would say at that point would be when God could have intervened in the process. Exactly how that happened is hard to say. Whether he just infused a soul into everybody all at once, and and a Catholic or a Thomist would call it an animal soul, or a rational soul, but or the beginnings of a rational soul. Here's the comparison I draw there. Is a child is not an infant. We say is created in the image of God and has a rational soul, but yet they can't think.
Mm.
They don't have abstract thought. They don't have language. They have no concept of God. They have none of that. And yet, we still view them as having a soul, of course. So I don't see any problem with recognizing, the all of our human relatives from Homo erectus on through Neanderthal and others as they were human, just immature and still developing. And there's also a view that looks at it as looks at Genesis 2:7 as just relating the creation of the physical body of Adam, of the man, I should say, because the language that's used in Genesis 2:7 there is also used of animals. Animals became a living soul because of the breath of life of God. And, and if you take that view where, humanity is not made of body and soul, but is instead, as Richard Middleton called it, we're a complicated unity. Then I would look at, the spiritual birth as being, our introduction into the spiritual life. And before a person is born again, put it in scare quotes, before a person is born again, then they are just flesh and blood, and they don't participate in the spirit. That would be another way to look at it. So I don't want to choose one or the other right now. Most people would lean towards the spirit. I mean, the human is a body and soul. But in any case,
Yeah. So how have people reacted to your article, either positively or negatively?
Pretty positively. I'm really encouraged by that. It's been a long journey between all the research that I was had to do. I've been researching this since about 2017 on a pretty hardcore basis. And almost everybody I put it in front of has really, really liked it, and I've got some really great comments like, well, I don't know. I hate to brag and I hate to throw people's names out without them.
Right. I get it.
But yeah, I'm working on a book proposal, and a lot of people have been enthusiastic enough to sign on and to offer to endorse it for me. I can't say Richard Middleton is I didn't even ask him. He just offered to write a foreword to the book, which I'm very grateful for. Jim, I guess I'll throw some names out. Jim Stump at BioLogos. BioLogos, of course, is not going to take any sort of position on Adam and Eve. That would be kind of contrary to their mission to stake one position out and say, this is it.
Right.
But, Jim Stump at BioLogos has offered, to give me an endorsement on the book. William P. Brown, he wrote The Pillars of Creation, which is a really wonderful book. And I do, I cite him a couple times in the article, but, he had written a book about, all the creation texts in the Bible and relating those to science, and him and Kelly James Clark, who's a philosopher who, is pretty well known and has written on the subject of science and faith too. So it's been very encouraging. A lot of people, have really liked it and really liked what I've done. Kelly James Clark gave me a real nice quote. Just, it's like, your ideas are terrific. And all right, now you got me bragging. See what you did?
So
now I'm going to have to go pray for forgiveness tonight.
Right. Got it. So let's end on a final question here, final topic, which is, how does this article and your work generally fit into the broader context of the debate about evolution within the church?
Right.
So how do you see it within a broader conversation and its role there?
Well, my goal, like I said, when we first started talking was, my goal was deal with the fact that so many young people were leaving the church and unnecessarily, because it was tied to a lot of this evolutionary thinking they've been, anti-evolutionary thinking they've been taught, by organizations like Answers in Genesis, or even the Discovery Institute. It seems like they're always writing some anti-evolution article and saying that evolution couldn't have happened and this and that. And honestly, the evidence for evolution is overwhelming, and there's really no point in trying to argue against it or say no, that couldn't have happened. So the problem that I was looking at was, a lot of evolutionary creationists, like say Pete Enns or Dennis Lamoureux, would just say, okay, excuse me. Oh, maybe you didn't hear that. Sorry. I got a notification in my headphone.
Oh, I didn't hear it. No.
Okay. I forgot I was wearing headphones, but it almost blew my ears out. All right, back to where I was. But, Dennis Lamoureux or Pete Enns or some other evolutionary creationists are just willing to say, well, there was no fall, there was no this and that. Just kind of, get over it type of thing. Mm. And that didn't sit well with me. And, so the problem that you have there is, a lot of the people who struggle with, moving from understanding Adam and Eve to being literal people to being able to accept an idea like, God using evolution to create. One of the big stumbling blocks for them is, well, if there was no fall, then, what need is there of redemption? Mm. And, I think I've answered that question, because, whether you agree with my conclusions or not, the fact is that our human moral ideas and human language and the human brain have all co-evolved, and there had to have been a point where humanity crossed from being ignorant animal to being a guilty adult. And I think if I had a claim to any innovation, the only innovation I've introduced is to say that there was a transitionary period in there of immature child and development, where, it's easy to understand how God could overlook those sins of ignorance, just like, God can overlook the sins of ignorance in a 3-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old, because they are not mature. They know not what they do.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jay. And it's been a pleasure.
Okay.
It's been a pleasure.
It was fun.
You. Yeah.
Yeah. We should do it again sometime.
We
I'll try to think of something new to say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and
I appreciate it.
Take it easy. God bless.
All right. You too, John. Bye-bye.